Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 7. We're going to be going into corporate strategies, diversification, and also some more stuff about restructuring a company.
All right, what you see here is stuff that we've already talked about when we get through integration. We talked about backward integration and forward integration. What we're moving on to today is diversification. And the biggest way that these two concepts differ is with integration, you're specifically talking about the supply chain. That's what I'm showing you right here, going from raw materials all the way down to customers. So you're specifically talking about the supply chain. You're not talking about anything else. So if it was a firm that the company is doing business with that's at the same level, so it is like a horizontal alliance, that wouldn't fit into the supply chain, right? It's a competitor. That would not fit in there. Or if it's a firm that is not the same level, but it's just in a different industry that has nothing to do with what the firm produces, again, that would not fall under the supply chain, so it would not be an example of vertical integration. We're talking about diversification, right? Now, I will mention that some examples of vertical integration are also examples of diversification, in particular related, right? Related diversification would be, vertical integration would be an example of related diversification. That would certainly be true, but not everything. So we'll talk about that today. We're also going to talk about unrelated diversification. So we've got a few different types to talk about here, right? So the way that you define this is you determine how close is the new area or the area that you're talking about, how close is it related to existing businesses that the company is already operating in. Right, so that's what you do. And here are the different areas that you would be talking about. All right, here we have different types of corporate diversification. So these are different ways that a company can diversify. And remember, like I said, you always compare this back to where the company currently is to make a determination of whether or not the diversification is a related move or if it's an unrelated move. So you got product diversification, right? This is entering a different industry or a same industry that the company currently operates in. You got geographic market diversification, and this would be entering, like I said, a new geographic market, whether that's international or just a new market that you haven't been into. That would be geographic market. And product market is when you do both at the same time. So let's talk a little bit more and break this down into several different categories. I want you to know the 5 different types of corporate diversification. And what I mean when I say 5, I mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So limited diversification and dominant diversification is going to be where you are given a percentage of sales. So if you have over 95% sales in one business, think about Starbucks and coffee, right? That would be probably 95% of their sales or more. It's a single business. But notice it's not everything, right? So with Starbucks, right, they also will sell coffee cups in stores as retail sales. If that was only 4%, it still counts as a single business. Now, a dominant business is where you're getting 70 and 95% in one business. Everything else is coming from somewhere else, right? So that would be dominant. Up to 95. Single is above 95. Now, if you're below 70%, then you're going to be in one of these other categories, related constrained and related linked. Now, with related constrained, what happens is basically every business unit in the firm, right, and every product share the same resources. So with Apple, you think about the operating system, it's being shared across the iPads, the iPhones, the smartwatches, right? The iMessage is available on Macs. You can also get an iMessage on the phones, right? So that's related constraint. A lot of resources are shared, right? Same engineers work with all the different products. Related linked is where only certain divisions of the company are sharing resources with each other. So with Disney, right, they've got movies, they've got theme parks. So the theme parks, they'll have some movie tie-ins. They've got ESPN, right? There's very little tie-in with ESPN in the theme parks itself, besides a few stadiums that they put up. But there is more of a tie-in with ESPN and ABC, which Disney also owns. So you'll see football, college football on Saturday on ABC. So that's related to link, sharing some resources with some divisions, but not all of them. And then finally, you've got unrelated diversification. You could think of Sun Capital or Berkshire Hathaway, right, where many different businesses, they really don't have too much similarity across any of the businesses. And the company is really engaged in very, very broad diversification. Okay, so how could diversification be a good thing for a company? Well, there should be some kind of economy of scale, and we'll talk about the different types of that in just a little bit. Or excuse me, economy of scope. I said scale, I meant scope, right? Or the second one, the focal firm should have a cost advantage over shareholders in getting the economy of scope. Let me explain what I mean by that. So as an investor, right, you've got several different options here, right? So one thing that a investor could do is if they wanted to be in industry X, industry Y, and industry Z, they could just buy 3 different companies. Or they can buy one company which is in industry X, Y, and Z. So they've got 2 choices. Let's look at a example of this. All right, so here on the right, we've got Sara Lee. Here on the left, we've got 3 different companies. Sara Lee is in single-serve coffee. They are in the corn dog industry, if you call it that, and also the hot dog industry. But there's 3 chains that are 3 different companies that are also in those 3 different industries. You've got Nathan's, a popular hot dog chain. You've got any of the carnivals that you could talk about are in corn dogs or Six Flags, something like that. And then you've got Keurig, right, which is owned by Green Mountain Coffee. So what is the incentive to buying one company versus 3 different companies? Well, one would be maybe it'd be different. Maybe it'll be a little easier to manage only having one company. But the problem is that these 3 products have all got to be outperforming 3 individual companies where their only focus is in that one area. Right? That's how you have true value in an investment. So what do investors prefer? Right? Well, you've got to give them some kind of incentive to purchase your one company if you're going to be in those 3 different areas. You got to have some kind of break that they get by being in that. So here, and we'll talk a little more about that in just a second, but here are the 4 common reasons why a business will diversify, right? Common reasons why they'll expand the business into either a new product area or a new geographic market. Operational, financial, anti-competitive, and managerialism, which we'll talk about. So that's a slightly different one. We'll talk about that one just a little bit. So first with operational economies of scope, right? The first one is just sharing those resources, getting some kind of a synergy, right? So you are exploiting efficiencies by sharing some of the activities of the firm. There are 3 key limits to this type of diversification. One would be at the bureaucratic cost. So at some point, those costs are going to keep rising, keep adding up, and they become quite significant. Right, the next one is going to be you have more of a limitation on your ability to meet the individual customer demands for each individual product, right? Because now you've got many different customers to think about. So you've got hot dog customers, you've got customers that want corn dogs and coffee, right? Different kind of consumers. You've got to be able to manage those expectations of different customers at the same time, right? And what can happen too is a weaker business can pull a stronger business down. Let's say the coffee industry, there is a problem where the cost of the beans goes up quite a bit, right? That is going to pull away a lot of your profit, right? And even if these 2 divisions are doing quite well, this one will be pulling it down. So that's another thing to be aware of. So let's move on to core competencies. We talked about core competencies a little earlier on, right? And it's something the company does well. Right? Something it's known for, it does extremely well. Dominant logic is something new that I want to explain. This is a common way of thinking about a business. So here's something to know. For every business that a company is in, every industry that is, each new product market, it needs to have a dominant logic. So each product market that the company is in needs to have a dominant logic. So that means it needs to have a way. Let's talk about let's talk about Disney. We were talking about that earlier. It needs to have a dominant logic for the sports industry, right? ESPN, right? Disney also needs to have a dominant logic for the theme park industry, right? But the thing is, it needs to also have a dominant logic for each geographic market. So Disney operates in the US, right? That's one dominant logic, right? Disney operates in Europe. That's another dominant logic. They also operate now in Hong Kong and Japan, right? So two additional dominant logics. You need to have one way of thinking for every business and every geographic market the company is in, right? So if you're asked on a test about that, what you would simply do is say how many different geographic markets the company is in and add that with how many industries that company is in, and you have the total amount of dominant logics. Okay, so how this affects the direction of diversification is the free cash flow hypothesis. It says that managers diversify because they've got money lying around, and the best direction of diversification is one that makes sense according to what the company is good in, right? So it makes sense for them to diversify into areas that they know. This almost argues for related diversification. The problem is that sometimes that might not be the best area to diversify into. Sometimes the firm should actually be moving in an area that's different from the way the company is currently running. Okay, the next economy of scope, that is the next reason to diversify, would be financial economies of scope. All right, let's first talk about the internal capital market. The idea is that inside people that work for the company, that is the firm, they can allocate capital across divisions a little bit more efficiently than the external capital market can, right? Because of, one reason would be taxation reasons. So there'd be a little bit of a break for a firm to reinvest money instead of issuing dividends to shareholders, and then shareholders using that to buy companies in different industries. There are some limits. One is that if you have too much unrelated diversification, it becomes difficult to manage. We talked about this as a diseconomy of scale. Right, so this comes back and it's an issue here again. And another one is escalation of commitment. Now, if you don't know what escalation of commitment is, you really want to understand that for the test and also just for life in general. And what escalation of commitment is where you continue to throw money after an effort, right? After a decision, even when it becomes pretty obvious that it's not the right decision, right? So you just don't know when to stop, right? So think about this, like let's say you have a friend that became a major in, let's say, engineering, right? And it becomes clear that they're not going to be interested in finishing with an engineering degree. Well, they keep taking classes, they keep failing, right? And at some point, they really should just stop and switch the major. But if they don't, that's an example of escalation of commitment. So that's what happens at the firm level as well. They keep throwing money at something. They don't know when to stop, don't know when to get out of that industry. So this would be a limit to expansion right there. Risk reduction is the next one. This one gets back to the concept of seasonality that we were talking about in an earlier class. And this says that a reason why a company is going to diversify is to spread the risk out over a year. So maybe it has one time of the year where business is doing really well. So water parks in the summer, Party City does really well on Halloween, right? And they want to spread that risk out, so they expand into a different area, right? So that they can get people coming through the doors and drive up business in what would otherwise be considered an off season, right? So this would lead to several things that we need to talk about here. One is that if you're an employee, you are paid in stock, right? So if you did not expand your business into something that would really run year-round, your employees don't get a chance to diversify their stock. So let's say that a Party City employees, their stock's going to do really well in October, and then it's going to crash, and it's not going to do really well the rest of the year. So in order for your employees to be happy, right, even that's one reason to diversify right there, right? You're spreading risk out for your employees, right, and also the executives that own stock in the company. Right, the next one to talk about under financial economies of scope is going to be tax advantages. Right, and this one, if you've ever heard the classic saying that something is a write-off for a company, this is where it comes from. Right, so this is where You might have lots of profits in one division. Well, having a division that's not performing as well allows you to write off some of the loss, and that will contribute to you having an overall lower tax account that's due. Okay, let's move on. Now let's talk about the third reason for diversification, and that is anti-competitive economies of scope. Right, in this one, we've got two things to talk about. We got multi-point competition and also market power. We'll talk about market power first. Right, this is one where it could involve predatory pricing. Right, and this is where you are using profits from one division to compete in another. So basically, you're giving the product away in one division of the company. So here's why I say razor refills. A lot of times you will see that Gillette and the other companies that make razors will essentially give the product away for free, right? The first one, and then they get you hooked, and then you have to come back and you buy razor refills, for example. You quickly learn when you go to the store to get a refill how expensive that is. It's quite a lot more than you would expect, right? So predatory pricing could be one issue. If it's explicit predatory pricing, that would be illegal, right? But sometimes it's really hard to prove, and so that's why companies will get away with it. Now, multi-point competition means that your company operates in several different markets. And what happens is there's an unwritten rule that says that firms will not be competing very aggressively in some of those geographic markets. Well, if the firm violates that agreement, then it will get punished, right? And I want to give you an example of that. And so let's talk a little bit about the case of AirTran, which was subsequently acquired by Southwest. I was a doctoral student at Florida State University, and when I was over there, I observed something really interesting that occurred, right? And what happened was that a lot of the students would fly from Miami into Tallahassee. It was a little bit of a smaller airport, and the price was $354 on American Airlines, right? So it was not the cheapest thing in the world. Well, the price to get from Tallahassee to Miami was $354, and the option was American Airlines. Look at how cheap it was to go even farther, right? To go from Atlanta to Miami was only $115 on American Airlines, and on AirTran, which again became Southwest Airlines recently, it was $140, right? So that's a little farther away than Tallahassee is from Miami, but yet the prices were much cheaper. Because so company decided we're going to compete in the Atlanta market, but we're not going to compete in the Tallahassee market. So guess what happens? $354 is what American Airlines is charging. AirTran enters the Tallahassee market, and they say we're going to fly to Miami. They offer their flight for $150, right? So guess what happened? American Airlines matched that $150 charge. And if you are a student and you had the option of either flying AirTran, right, which you could think about that sort of like Spirit or Frontier Airlines, or you could fly American Airlines, which one are you going to pick? You're going to pick American. So almost no one was flying AirTran. So guess what happened? American decided they're going to punish AirTran, right? So they initially they matched the price, 150 you could fly AirTran or American. They eventually drive AirTran out of the market. No one was flying it. So as soon as AirTran left, guess what American Airlines did? They raised the price of its ticket back to even more than what it was. It was up to about $400. Initially it was $354, went down to $150 to drive out AirTran. Then it went back to $400. So they were American was punishing AirTran for competing in a market where they had agreed not to aggressively, or implicitly agreed not to aggressively compete. The fourth reason to diversify is employee incentives, right? So the research finds that the biggest predictor of CEO pay is going to be how large the firm is. So if you are a CEO and you want to get a bigger paycheck, what's the easiest way to do that? Grow the firm. And what's the easiest way to grow the firm? Just buy up or expand your company into a new area, right? So a lot of times diversification is not done just to satisfy and benefit shareholders, right? It's to give managers more money, right? They have larger scope. The firm gets larger, they get more compensation, right? It's the biggest driver of CEO pay is the size of the firm. And so managers have the incentive to acquire the firms and become bigger. Now, managerialism is the name of the theory that basically says that managers will do whatever they can. They're basically scoundrels that will do whatever they can to drive up their own pay. Right? The opposite of managerialism is human capital theory, which basically says that managers, in fact, do a good job, right? And they earn the pay that they make. And we'll talk a little bit more about that stuff a little later on. Okay, so now let's talk about some other issues with diversification. Right? We remember we talked about the competitive advantage. We went through value, we went through rare. Well, one of the issues is that diversification as a strategy is not going to be seen as something being particularly rare, right? It happens a lot. Other companies can see what's going on. What is rare are some of the mechanisms that will make diversification more successful for one company than another. And one of those mechanisms is capability. So some companies have a capability, which means that they just can go out there, do diversification, and have more of a chance of that being successful. All right, so we talked a little bit about diversification. We're going to switch gears and now talk about another way that companies can compete. And we'll talk about strategic groups. All right, so strategic groups is something that doesn't happen at a different level than the company is operating in. It's actually the same level, right? So it's companies that are going to the competition and they are benchmarking, right? And sometimes what they do is they implicitly join or explicitly join a group of firms, and it gets into co-opetition. You'll see the term co-opetition, which means that there's a little bit of cooperation, even though that they are competitors, right? And a strategic group, in a nutshell, the easiest way to think about it is companies that compete for a very similar customer. Right, a very, very similar type, different segment, a very similar segment of the market. Right, so a strategic group consists of a set of industry competitors that have similar characteristics to each other, but they do still have key differences. Right, it narrows the focus by centering on subsets of the competitors whose strategies are similar to each other. Right, so when you do an analysis of strategic groups in an industry, you can determine a company's closest rivals, you can determine an alternative path to become successful, and you might be able to find some untapped opportunities. Right, so companies that are in the same strategic group oftentimes are going to look like each other. Right? They're going to resemble each other in a lot of different ways here, such as having similar product breadth. Right, so one doesn't have a complete different line of products that another one doesn't have. They have very similar price and quality ranges. Of course, there'll be nuances and little tiny differences, but for the most part, right, they have very similar price and qualities. Right, they have very similar distribution channels. If one company is selling online, then that means every other company generally in the same strategic group is doing the same thing. Right, they use similar product attributes to appeal to similar set of buyers. Identical technology approaches. Right? They offer buyers similar services, and generally they will cover the same geographic area if you're in the same market, same strategic group. Because remember, we're not just talking about diversification as far as products, we're also talking about it in terms of geographic markets. So the products themselves are pretty similar. The geographic markets as well are pretty similar. So let's talk about some guidelines for doing the construction of a strategic group map. Right, the first guidance is that when you come up with the axes, you have an x-axis and a y-axis. Whatever you pick for either one of those axes should have a lot of differences among the different companies. So it shouldn't be very homogeneous. So for example, quality, if we're looking at the restaurant industry, there should be significant differences in quality among the different companies in the industry. Also, breadth of menu is another good choice. That's a good choice for the x-axis because there's a lot of differences in breadth of menu among the different companies that are in the restaurant industry. So that would be a good choice right there. The variables should reveal big differences in how the different companies compete. And when the rivals are differ on both variables, their locations will be scattered. right? So it's easier to see one group of companies is over here, one group is over there, right, and whatnot, right? So we have different ones. The ones that have low perceived quality and not very big menus would be KFC, Popeyes, Pizza Hut would be one that would fall under there, right? Where the breadth of menu gets a little bit more, you get slightly more things to have like Burger King, Jack in the Box, McDonald's. We could say Dickey's Barbecue would probably be over there. I'll tell you what, if you were to say perceived quality being high and very low breadth of menu, probably would put In-N-Out somewhere up there. I wouldn't put In-N-Out at the level of Ruth's Chris, but I'd probably put it somewhere over here above KFC and Popeyes and Pizza Hut, right? Because at In-N-Out, all you can do is get burgers and shakes and fries, and that's it. You can't get chicken there. Jimmy John's, Subway, Quiznos, thought to be a little bit better in quality, but doesn't have quite a lot of different options for you to get there, right? Look at a diner, right? Or look at Cracker Barrel or Denny's, which would be in the same group, right? There they have lots of options to order from on the menu, but the quality is not perceived to be very, very good, right? A little bit better quality at Applebee's and Chili's, restaurants that be at that level, right? But obviously extremely high quality over at Ruth's Chris, P.F. Chang's, Maggiano's Italian, right? Stuff like that would fall under there, right? And that would be a strategic group. So all these are different strategic groups. The different companies that are listed in there are pretty similar, right? And they would that's one of the things you would look for when you're trying to do a strategic group map. Right, okay. Drawing sizes of circles proportional to the combined sales of firms in each group allows the map to reflect relative market share sizes of each group. So if this group had quite a lot of sales, right, it had maybe this is like 50% of the sales, you would want to make that circle for this strategic group, Cracker Barrel and Denny's, much, much larger. You should make it proportional. In here, we don't really do that. We don't really make the circles equal how much share they have of the market. Right? If three or more good competitive variables can be used, then several maps can be drawn. Right? So you can only have to deal with an X and a Y, but you might be able to put together several different graphs, right? Where you have one showing you quality and breadth of menu. Maybe another one would show you cost, would be something interesting. And the breadth of menu, maybe one would be showing you number of customers, right? And maybe perceived quality, something like that. Right? So different options to come up with a graph. Right? And then several different maps could be drawn. So what is the use for all this stuff? What's the use of doing this analysis? Well, by doing strategic groups, you can identify which industry members are rivals and which one are distant rivals, right? So ones that are in the same strategic group are going to be a little bit more rivalrous than something that's outside of that strategic group. So what I mean by that, should Ruth's Chris be worried about the newest menu item added to the menu of Burger King? Probably not, right? And Burger King shouldn't be worried too much about what's going on up here, right? Really, they compete a lot more within the same strategic group. Now, is it all competition? Not necessarily, right? So a lot of times, companies in the same group will get together and they will pull resources into lobbying efforts. So if there's some kind of rule that would affect all the fast food companies, right, they'll get together and they'll form an alliance and they'll try to lobby for the conditions to improve to the benefit of every member of that strategic group. Okay, right, and firms, strategic groups that are far apart in the map may hardly compete at all. That's just what we explained. So not all positions on the map are equally attractive, so prevailing competitive pressures and driving forces are going to a lot of times favor some groups, and in others, they're actually going to face a negative from that. And the profit potential of different groups varies due to the strengths and weaknesses of each group's market position. Okay, and the last thing, and this is another example, we talked about strategic groups in the restaurant industry. This is just showing you what the groups would look like if you're doing a retail industry, right? And in this one, it satisfies that criteria, right, that says that you should draw a size of circles proportional to the combined sales of firms. That's actually happened in this one. So this right here, Walmart and Kmart have quite a lot of the market, right? So a lot of sales in this retail insurer coming from these stores right here. Maybe more so Walmart than Kmart, but still together, right, that segment is quite large. And looking when comparing it to others. Right, so this one actually satisfies just about everything that we're talking about. And this one, you have price and quality, right? On the y-axis, and then the x-axis, you have geographic coverage. All right, folks, that's going to do it for the lesson. Thank you all, and good luck.